Welcome back, viewers, to another episode of Policy Debate with Shazil Malik. Today, we have a very distinguished guest, Dr. Miftah Ismail, with us, who is going to talk to us about the pitfalls of Pakistan's economy. Miftah Saab, thank you so much for joining us today. Lekin, what should I call you? Should I call you a technocrat, a businessman, a jack of all things finance? How would you like that?
I don't know. I guess first of all, I should just point out that I'm not the finance minister anymore. I'm the former finance minister.
Absolutely.
So, and I guess I have been a businessman. I have been a technocrat and also a politician. So, but at this point, a politician, I think.
So just take us through your journey of where you started and now where you and not really ended it, but where you've paused it till the elections start again to your finance ministry role.
Well, I mean, I was after I joined Muslim League in 2010 and spent some time with Muhammad Nawaz Sharif and Shahbaz Sharif. In 2011, they asked me to, Shahbaz Sharif asked me to become head of the Punjab Board of Investment. I had been living in Karachi till then. So I moved from Karachi to Lahore, took up the job of head of Punjab Board of Investment. Then I worked for about a year and a half or a year or so. Then I joined the Muslim League effort for the elections in 2013. After the elections in January 2014, 6 months after Mian Sahib came into power, he appointed me as head of the Board of Investment. And before he left, he had appointed me as head of the Privatization Commission. Then when Mr. Abbasi became Prime Minister, he made me a special assistant to the Prime Minister. And I was already a special assistant to the Prime Minister in terms of my rank. But he just basically made me assistant for economic affairs and took me away from the privatization office into his own office. So I was working in his office for 6 months. And then when Mr. Dar resigned, then he made me the finance advisor, which is equivalent to a minister. And then a month before, because I had made the budget and I was the one who was going to present the budget. So a month before that, I left, he made me the finance minister.
Right. Perfect. But before we dive into the intricacies of the Pakistan's economy, tell me a little bit more about your stint as the head of privatization commission. I believe that you must have sat down on boards of Pakistan International Airlines, the steel mills. Is that true? And if it is, like, what was your experience? Why have not we been able to fix PIA? What is wrong with the steel mills? Is there a way forward or not?
I was actually chairman of Sui Southern Gas Company. Even before I became Board of Investment Chairman, I had become chairman of Sui Southern Gas Company, and which is the company that looks after Sindh and Balochistan. And we, of course, have a Sui Northern Gas Pipeline Company, which looks after KP and Punjab. Then while I was there as chairman Board of Investment, I also became director of Pakistan International Airlines, and so I served on that board PIA for a little while. I resigned, I think, in a year or so. Swiss Southern Gas.
Why did you resign?
Actually, the thing is that I was at that point chairman of Board of Investment. I was chairman of Swiss Southern Gas, and I didn't really have enough time. So I stopped going to the PIA meetings because I just couldn't read all the material, and I didn't think that I could do a good enough job. So I'd requested then advisor for aviation, Mr. Shujat Azim, to relieve me, and I'd also requested the PM office to relieve me, and so then they found somebody else and relieved me after a few months after I requested them.
What is structurally wrong with PIA, and can it become profitable, and can it reach its former glory of 2 decades back?
First of all, I contest very severely this title that it was somehow there was a former glory 2 decades back. There was none, I promise you. At the moment, the airline is losing about 40 billion rupees, 45 billion rupees a year. For an airline which has total sales of 90 billion rupees, that's not a small feat. It's very difficult to lose the kind of money that PIA loses. Really is. I mean, and I think that if the government were able to run it well and make it profitable, then the government wouldn't have brought it to the stage that it has. So I think that we should understand that PIA will not be able to make a profit in the public sector, that it has to be privatized. And if it's privatized, it will grow, it will have more employees, and it will make profits, and it will add not just to the government treasury, rather than being a huge burden on it, but it will actually create more employment and facilitate passengers more. So PIA at this point is just a
what is
fluke.
that switch? What is that switch that takes it from when you take it from public to private sector and it becomes more profitable, it becomes more efficient? What is that?
So one can answer it at many different levels. I mean, I think the easiest answer to that is that, that in 1952, when the armistice happened in the Korean Peninsula, so North and South Korea were equally developed or equally, underdeveloped. And today, if you look at North Korea and South Korea, I think that explains to you the difference between public sector and the private sector. So I mean, it's very difficult. And now, I think at this stage and at this time that somehow public sector can outperform private sector, it cannot. It has not done so anywhere in the world, and it will not do so in Pakistan. In Pakistan, public sector is especially encumbered by laws that ostensibly try to reduce corruption, pepper laws, purchasing laws, and things like that. Mm-hmm. There is also this dilemma that in public sector you're not able to fire anybody. So you have all these employees that you cannot fire people. The problem is not that there are just too many employees. The problem is that if there is no threat of a person being fired, that means that there is no reason for them to work hard. I mean, you cannot incentivize. There is no stick. And there is even the carrot, if somebody is not promoted, they can go to court. The Pakistani court system is very permissive and promiscuous, I would say, and people get stay orders.
I get the bureaucracy around public enterprises, but why not then privatize it? And I believe the reason that you haven't been able to is because of a staunch opposition. And the reasoning given there was that it was not being done in a fair and transparent manner. Would you agree with it, disagree, or a mix of both?
No, I completely disagree. Every political party in Pakistan, PTI, People's Party, had in their manifesto, somewhere in their manifesto, that they were all for privatization. When we started the process of privatization, there was, of course, the labor unions of PIA that opposed it, but all these political parties also opposed it, and then 2 people were killed in the ensuing protests. So after 2 people were killed, there was no way a democratic government could privatize, and nobody would have bid for it also. And whether this was being done in a transparent or non-transparent manner, that question cannot be answered because the process hadn't started yet. We just, I think, hired a company, a financial advisor, to advise us how to privatize it, and there was going to be bidding, open bidding, clear bidding, and there was going to be a data room. People would have been able to do due diligence and would have bid. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how.
The question is, agreed that it is the allegation it was not fair and transparent. I understand your point. But coming back to how the death of 2 people stopped you from privatizing this, aren't you setting a bad precedent by doing this? So anytime there is a huge protest, anytime it gets violent, it is easy to stop the government from doing its job the way they see fit.
But we are a democratic government. And when people die, we take it seriously. We are a democratic government when there's all the opposition political parties oppose it. These parties had the majority in the Senate. There was no way we could have done this. PIA, the problem with PIA was that PIA was at that point not a company but a corporation. It's a technical Pakistani law thing. That it was not like really a company formed and registered with the SECP in the sense. And PIA had been done by PIA Act. So we had to change laws to privatize it, and in order to change laws, we needed a majority in both houses of Parliament, Senate, and the National Assembly. We had a majority in the National Assembly, but not in the Senate. So we had to talk to the opposition. And the thing is that, such issues, PIA is a very sensitive issue in Pakistan, and such issues in any case should not be done on the basis of bare majorities, and that you need to take all the political parties together. The unilateral decisions that majorities take sometimes, they sort of lead to acrimonious relations between opposition and government, and they lead to a lot of grievances. Nothing good comes out of that. I think that for important policy matters, there should be a consensus. That's what we tried to build, and it never happened. And when people get killed, then obviously you think about this. If there are all the political parties are against it, except for Muslim League, if there are 16,000 or 20,000 people on the streets trying to protest, and PIA shuts down, if there are people killed, in that environment, in that toxic environment, who would bid for PIA? Okay, nobody would bid.
The value will go down for the private investor. So now let's come to the juicy point and the juicy part of the economy. So before we start, speaking to somebody who I come from a non-economics background. So explain to me what parts to an economy of a country constitute. So if you're looking at indicators, which indicators would you like to look at, and what is, as a Pakistani national, what should people be looking at?
As an economist, if I look at a country's economy or any country's economy, the first thing I would look at is GDP per head, per person. What is the GDP per person? That tells me how wealthy or poor that country is. And then I would look at the growth in that income. Just think about this. If you're trying to figure out the economic well-being of a person, what would first thing you would look? You would look at his income, right? And then you would also see if the income is stagnant or growing. So that's the first thing. So as a nation, if you look at a nation, you look at the GDP, which is the collection of the income of all the individuals in the country, and then you also look at how fast or slow the GDP is moving. So that's the other thing you look at. That's the
GDP growth, GDP per capita.
Per capita. Then you also look at inflation. Because inflation is a huge tax on the poor and things become expensive, and because there is fixed to poor people, salaried class people especially have fixed incomes, so their incomes remain stagnant, and if there is inflation, that eats away their standard of living, that eats away their ability to buy stuff. That's the other thing I would look. Then you would look at component parts of the GDP. How is the agriculture sector doing? How is the industrial sector doing? How is the services sector doing? Then you look at the fiscal policy of the government. How is the budget deficit? That tells you about how the fiscal policy of the government is, and is the budget deficit under control? Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Then, of course, you look at trade deficit and import and export. Those are the things I would look at.
So let's dive into these further details. So GDP growth for Pakistan, at least the projected one for 2018 by ADP numbers, is 5.5%. That's the nominal GDP growth. Would you agree with that?
No, our growth estimates for 17-18 for the year ending June 30th is 5.79%, and I would agree with the 5.79%. That's the statistics division of the government of Pakistan. And that's let me just finish this. That's real growth. That is real growth. That is not nominal growth. That is so that's after inflation. That's the real growth in GDP, and the 5.5% number that ADP gives, I'm sure, is also a real growth number, not before inflation.
No, so the number that I got from ADP, it was nominal, and the real drops down to 1 point something, with taking into account of 4.7 growth rate. 13% growth rate, if you're saying that's a nominal GDP, that is huge. That is, I believe China at this point is growing at 12 to 13%, is it not?
I think China is growing at, I don't know, between 7 and 10%. I don't remember exactly this year's growth number, but those are real numbers. I mean, Pakistani economy is going to grow by 5.79% this year. Simple as that.
So it will. Okay, so let's take that. So let's use these as real GDP numbers, not nominal. But it still puts us below India, Bangladesh, our neighbors.
Oh yes. So, by far.
Right. And then even when we look at GDP per capita at 2.7%, is that ballpark for you?
I mean, our GDP will grow in real terms by 5.79% this
Right.
year. It will, and obviously this is a provisional estimate that will change, but
Of
that's a
course.
non-biased correct estimate, I think, at this point. Next year, we're projecting it to increase by 6.25%. Our growth population is about 2.4%, so you basically subtract 2.4% from whatever growth number you get. So if let's say it's 5.8%, and if your population is growing at 2.4%, then your GDP growth per capita is approximately 3.8%.
And with this, viewers, we conclude our first part of this interview. Do join us again for the second part. Thank you very much. Khudafis.